Good morning and welcome to Lay Servant Training Transforming Evangelism. I'm Cliff Kircha, and we're fortunate today to have a special guest, Reverend Valli Blair, who's been recognized in her achievements in helping several churches in our conference revitalize. I hope you find this training very interesting and engaging, and I hope you want to learn more about how to revitalize your church. Valli, can you join us? Welcome.
Hey,
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Valli.
I'm Valli Blair. I've served in the Rio, Texas Conference for 27 years. I have a passion for the rural church and small churches and revitalization.
Hey, Valli, when you go to a new church, do you have a specific plan for evangelism and revitalization?
No, I really don't. I think each church has its own individual DNA, so I don't go in with a set plan, but I do go in with specific strategies.
Now, is it different for small or rural churches than other churches in your experience?
Yes, it has been different. A rural church is more geared for personal attention from the pastor in the beginning. And so I go in with like 4 things that I do in the beginning. One is I go in and I have a time of listening. And that sounds very simple, but it's intentional listening. So I go in with maybe 3 or 4 questions that as people come through my office, or if we are having informal coffee or something like that, then I ask them the same questions. And not every church has the same questions, but here's a little bit of what I would ask. I would ask them, what does this congregation do best? I would ask them, what are your dreams for this congregation? And then I would ask them, how do you see yourself fitting into this congregation and the life and the ministry, not only of this church, but of this community? And that gets the ball rolling. And then I begin to get kind of a congruent picture of this church's not only history, what's happened in the past, what does this church do well, but also expectations of where they want to go, and maybe even a hint of part of their DNA. Every church, especially a small church, has a history, a collective history, and a DNA. And being able to tap into that begins the pastor relationship with the congregation, where they can begin to develop a sense of trust. And from that, then they begin to develop a vision.
I see. Now, are there specific things you do to ensure that the laity is engaged in all of this revitalization and activities?
Yes, and it doesn't sound like it in the beginning, but I think this has been my strategy. When you go into a small parish, what I do is I begin with basic pastoral care. It's absolutely imperative, because the relationship of the pastor to the church is a trust relationship. And if I were to go in with an evangelism program that was just fantastic, and I hadn't connected with that church in a meaningful way, it wouldn't go very far,
Right.
especially in a rural church. Because the first thing I do is I go in and I ask who's in the hospital, who's experienced a death, who's had a baby, where's your homebound list, who's in the nursing home. And then I begin to make pastoral calls, personal calls, and I do that within 48 hours after before I unpack my boxes, basically. And I set a time, a regular schedule of when I'm going to go visit at the nursing homes. And I begin to write notes to all the parishioners, telling them I'm here and I would love to meet them. All of that happens in the first week or 2, and it pays off in big dividends. How do you say that word?
Dividends?
Dividends.
Yeah.
It pays off really big.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think
that's
I've had more
important.
than one mentor say to me in so many words that the church really needs to know that you love them
That's right.
before they're interested to know what you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
And not it that's part of it, but the other part, when you begin to do that bedrock work as pastor, that foundational work, the trust level antes up.
Trust,
And
okay.
then people begin to trust you with their dreams and with the things that they have thought was fragile, or maybe they were afraid to talk about as far as, what could happen. And it begins to break open a whole lot of things that you wouldn't expect. So the pastoral care is absolutely essential, and it cannot be passed off to anyone else. It has to be done by the pastor in the real church setting.
Maybe this is why we always ask pastors at annual conference, will you visit house to house? Maybe there's a lot more to that than we realized. Can you tell me a little bit about the vision for Three Rivers United Methodist?
The vision for Three Rivers United Methodist, let me begin with my first Sunday there.
Okay.
We had the after church coffee thing. And I'm having coffee and trying to remember all the names and everything that you do in that first meeting. But I'll never forget this. One of the saintly members of the church, meaning well, came up to me and said, now, honey, you need to understand this, that this is an old church, and we don't have children. We haven't had children for years and years. And we're never going to have children.
Oh, man.
And I guess the look on my face was kind of like, I was devastated. I really, everything shows on my face. And she said, now you need to know this for real, because my granddaughter moved here with her 2 grandchildren and asked me when Sunday school was. And I told her, don't bring them here. Take them to the Baptist church. And at that point, one of my other members stepped in and said, it's okay. We're going to get to that place. So the expectation when you go into a rural church, especially one that has been depressed, has been isolated,
Sure.
has suffered a tremendous amount of heartbreak economically, the kids are moving out and there's no jobs for them to move back, then helping them understand that there is a future. It may not look like it did 50 years ago, but there is a future, is vital. And so as pastor, I had to carry that vision for them when they just couldn't carry it or see it for themselves. And so that's vital. And
you were able to do that because you had done all that pastoral care and they trusted you. You had built this level of trust and they could follow your leadership.
But over the years, I've realized the pastoral care, even since my very first little church I had, was the first thing I did. But if I had been confronted with that kind of negativity in my first pastorate out, I might have just never had a vision, never had a hope.
Right.
But as I've grown, I've realized that I'm going to hear that, and what they're feeling is real for them. But what I need to do at that point is keep praying.
Sure.
Carry the vision, a vision, and then every time I get the opportunity to break that vision open for them, I do. I'll say, but you know what? In 2 years, let's have children in this Sunday school class, and let's build steps to get there. Let's work together on how to do that. And in 3 years, let's have a youth group, and let's have music, and let's strategize on how to get from where we are now to where we want to be. And let's look at the people we have now, and not the people we wish we had or the people that are gone. But let's look at reality.
I see. Now, I know you were recognized for some of your work at Mertzen. Were there similarities or differences that kind of jump at you when you compare Mertzen to Three Rivers, or are they just totally unique?
No, there are some similarities. Part of the similarity is, again, the pastoral care and the rural setting. Immersing yourself in the community as pastor is very, very important. I learned that early on in Mertzen. So that not only are you pastor to the people in your church, but you are seen as pastor in the community. And so you go to the basketball games, the football games. I was a judge of a 4-H fancy cake contest and the salsa fest and everything you can eat. I was probably a judge of in Three Rivers. I taught singing and music to students that were participating in UIL and needed a coach. But all those things, it doesn't mean I'm particularly good at those things, except eating. I am good at eating. But all those things give you entree into their life and builds community. And when you begin to get a connection, a real connection with your congregation, then they begin to know that you do love them. And that's vital.
You know, this kind of rings true for me. When I was first at Yorktown, I was frustrated because we would have this training available in San Antonio, and I could never get anyone to go with me.
Exactly.
And some wise Methodist named Doc Makeda pulled me aside one day and he said, "You know, preacher, if we went with you to San Antonio, we're going to have to put an ad in the paper the week before." And I said, "What do you mean, Doc?" And he said, "Well, we'd have to tell them, you know, the Methodists are going to be in San Antonio, so the baseball practice is canceled.
Yeah.
The fire station is closed. Somebody needs to check on Doc's bull when it gets out." And it kind of struck me that that's, you know, these smaller churches, their discipleship is so much part of the community.
It is.
They can't just pull up and go to training somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you want to empower your laity in the small or the rural church, you have to think outside the box.
Yes.
And sometimes that means pooling with the other churches in the community, and then getting speakers to come in for all the churches. We did that in Three Rivers, and we did that in Mertzen also. And I also found, and this is peculiar probably to the rural church, that I could really double down on my education and my Christian formation if I could find a curriculum that would also be the curriculum for the adults, the children, and the youth.
Yes.
And
yes.
then I would use that curriculum and preach from that curriculum.
Yes.
And then write talking notes from my sermon and put that in the bulletins for them to go home with and have
Very
talking
nice.
points at home.
Very nice.
And then the next week come back and we
Yes.
would start with those talking points in the sermon again and work from there. And it really did begin to give them not only a conversation that they could have in which everybody in the family could take part in, but it began to kind of create a hunger to know more.
Yes. You know, what it reminded me of when you said being a community pastor, it's also a community Bible study.
Yes.
Yeah, you look
Yes.
up and everybody from all these other churches are
Absolutely.
coming to your Bible study.
I'll tell you a story about that. In Three Rivers, we had a Wednesday night program when I first got there, and we averaged about 12 people, and they were all adults, and they had the book that they opened and the curriculum that they read, and we had a small little meal and a prayer, and they were faithful. Faithful. After we did that for a summer, I introduced something called Table Talk. Table Talk is a curriculum written by Carl Fraser.
Okay.
And it's in Cokesbury, and it is one of those intergenerational approaches to learning. And he took the salvation stories of the Old Testament, the Noah's Ark and the creation, and just the covenant. How do you make a covenant? Moses crossing over the Red Sea. All those stories, and in that curriculum, there was a PowerPoint. There were table talking points that you could put out. There was things that you would send home. It was a very all kind of inclusive thing. And what ended up happening from that little group is that children and youth and adults and young adults began to come to that. And as they did, that became my core group. And we went from 12 to about 25. And we met every Wednesday night. And of those 25, probably 18 began to come to worship. And the others would always be on the peripheral because they belonged to other churches, which was great. It was fine. That core group became my leaders over time.
Yeah.
And I would not have known that then, but that's what happened.
I see.
And that core group also began the nucleus that became my mentors and my confirmands that would be confirmed 18 months from then.
Now it sounds like that would have been. I know both Three Rivers and Merchant have been seemingly become self-sustaining.
Yes, they
have.
have.
And I guess that's part of it, is that involvement from that, what you call your core group Bible study, that really produced the self-sustaining leadership over time, I guess.
Yes, it did. And it also created a culture of can do, that there is hope, and it created a culture of empowerment.
Sure.
So
sure.
several things came out of that. When I left there, that Wednesday night Bible study had been totally taken over by a rotation of adults.
Very nice. I see.
I led the children's ministry on Wednesday nights when I was there. And I sometimes some of the pastors would say, why are you leading the children's ministry and somebody else doing the adults? But it was really important for those kids to have a pastor leading them. Of course, I had people helping me do that.
Sure.
But we averaged 50 to 60 on a Wednesday night.
Fantastic.
Every single Wednesday night. It was amazing. Lynn Henneke, Shirley and Tim Jambers, the key laity that were there when I got there, that was one of their hopes and visions, one of their dreams, that we would be able to break that open and it would happen. And it did.
Well, this is certainly encouraging. It sounds like it's all good news for any church that's interested in being revitalized and taking on new life. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And your leadership.
Can I tell you one more story?
Yes.
Okay, but from that came, from that Wednesday night group and the empowerment, the confirmands, all that rolled together, we began a 501c3 called Heavenly Angels. And what the church realized when we began to have all these people together, that we had a number of young adults who were mentally disabled, but once they graduated from high school in Live Oak County, there was absolutely nothing, no place, nothing that they could do.
See.
And so we thought that was not in God's design. And so I didn't do this. My laity, with the help of other like-minded laity, began a Christian 501c3 called Heavenly Angels. And the program nested in our church. And it taught mentally disabled folks that just graduated from high school how to cook, how to make crock pot meals, how to freeze them. They had a specific how to shop and buy the food that they needed, how to prepare the food, how to serve the food, with the idea that eventually they would break out of our kitchen and begin their own restaurant. And all the funds would go back into teaching these life skills to these kids. And what ended up happening was that these kids, young adults, woke up every morning with purpose in their life. And I think purpose is a godly thing. And I don't know how many times they would knock on my door as pastor, and they would have their latest soup or their latest sandwich, and we go out, sit in the back of the church and on little picnic tables, and they would serve me or practice taking my order.
Oh, very nice.
But now they have gotten their own building, their own kitchen.
Wow.
They've gotten a little craft store, kind of like a Cracker Barrel thing, where you can go buy something that they've made. And they serve every single day in Three Rivers. They serve lunch to the public.
That's probably the perfect example of revitalization. Probably had no idea going there.
No, I had no idea. I did not go in with a plan that we're going to develop a 501c3.
Right.
That came, but when you unleash the people to do what they feel empowered to do, and you step out of the way as pastor, then these things begin to happen.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And I think it is creating a culture of hope and carrying that vision, and then giving them that vision over and over through preaching and teaching and praying and pastoral care.
Beautiful. Thank you, Valli.
You're welcome.